Hello, and welcome to Cosmic Sword Radio. This is part 1 of our deep dive into Dungeon Crawl Classics. In this crash course, I'll be going over the things I'd want my players to know about DCC before coming to the table or even committing to a campaign. The core rulebook is 460 plus pages, and I know they're not going to be doing the homework on that. And depending on how this goes, I might go through some of the other role-playing systems I've collected, including things like AEG's 4th and FFG's 5th edition Legend of the Five Rings, the Luke Crane family of games, which are Mouse Guard, Torchbearer, The Burning Wheel, and his most recent Miseries and Misfortunes. I'll probably be referencing the OSR quite a bit, and Lamentations of the Flame Princess is a good example of exactly that. Finally, I may branch out into some Powered by the Apocalypse descended systems like Blades in the Dark and Ironsworn. If any of those pique your interest, let me know in the comments below. Now, let's get started on our crash course into Goodman Games' Dungeon Crawl Classics. DCC was designed to capture the rose-tinted memories that old-school gamers have from back in the day. It's meant to deliver what I imagine role-playing must have been like in the 70s. Goodman Games took the work of Gary Gygax, Dave Arneson, and the rest of the TSR crew, the unmistakable artwork of Errol Otis, Jeff Easley, Jim Holloway. Goodman took these things, distilled down what they evoke, and built a rule system that would recreate it by cranking it up to 11. This isn't a retro clone. This isn't 1st or 2nd edition faithfully cleaned up and repackaged. Dungeon Crawl Classics is its own game, and it's a brilliant love letter to the old spirit of the hobby. It also pulls from the same inspiration that TSR did, namely Appendix N. If you've never heard of it before, Appendix N was a list of authors and stories that influenced the creation of D&D, and I think players whose exposure mainly consists of 3.5, 4th, or 5th edition may be surprised by some of the entries. Things well outside the realm of Tolkien's high fantasy, things like Edgar Rice Burroughs' Mars and Venus series, which fall into the Sword and Planet genre, the Sword and Sorcery Conan stories by Robert E. Howard, the cosmic horror of H.P. Lovecraft, and Jack Vance's Dying Earth series, from which we get Vancian magic and the name Vecna, which is of course an anagram. Goodman Games isn't shy about drawing upon these sources either, so any potential player should be aware that the DM's peanut butter aliens, dinosaur, robots, and time travel are going to get into the player's chocolate fantasy setting. A cursory glance over the cover art for Dungeon Crawl Classics modules should make this immediately obvious. And I enjoy peanut butter in my chocolate, but not everyone does. Likewise, not everyone enjoys funky proprietary dice, so let's talk about what I think may be the biggest snag for most people considering picking up this system. Your typical polyhedral dice set includes 2 percentile dice, along with a 4, 6, 8, 12, and 20-sided die. Dungeon Crawl Classics requires a supplemental set called Zaki dice. They are 3, 5, 7, 14, 16, 24, and 30-sided dice. Some of them look absolutely funky, and I love them. But why do we need them? Well, DCC uses something called the dice chain. Basically, you move up and down the chain, rolling larger or smaller dice depending on your situation. It's Goodman Games' answer to advantage and disadvantage. The dice chain also plays a role in character advancement, spell casting effects, weapon damage, and the like. Zaki dice fill in the gaps of your standard polyhedral set and give you a die on either side of your d20. Now, there are ways to simulate these dice with what you already own. For example, when you have to roll a 24-sided die, you can just roll a d6 and a d12. If the d6 rolls 1 through 3, then you just take the result of the d12. If it rolls 4 to 6, then you add 12 to the result of the d12, and that will get you the full range from 1 to 24 evenly. If you have to roll a 16-sided die, you just roll your d20 and re-roll any results of 17 to 20. Personally, I don't want to deal with all that, so I just bought a set on Amazon. Finally, you should also note that erasable mats and miniatures are optional. So, if I haven't scared you off yet, congratulations. Dungeon Crawl Classics might be a good fit for you. Let's continue this intro with some other notable differences between this system and what you've already played. We'll start off with something I personally dislike. There are no skills or skill points. While that's not entirely true, the thief gets bonuses to skills like Pickpocket, Disable Trap, and Disguise Self, but no other class has skills. They're not even on the character sheets you can download from Goodman Games' website, and I'm actually okay with that. I kinda like niche protection. The other classes get skills based on their occupation from before becoming adventurers, what they were at level 0, and I actually like that too. What I don't like, and what I mean is, there's no skills listed to correspond with the previously held occupations. You just make them up. I know this is meant to be old school, and the DM should just adjudicate on a case-by-case basis if the character would have any training in a specific skill, but the rest of this book is so beautifully codified, so mechanically detailed. This is a 460-page book with not even 2 pages dedicated to skills and skill checks. I don't like that, but that's my own gripe. Much like Lamentations of the Flame Princess and other OSR systems, humans have the potential to be a number of different classes, but for demi-humans, your race is your class. If you play an elf, your class is elf. Same for dwarf and halfling, and we'll be getting deeper into that later on. I'm super excited to get into the next two things, but for now, just know that there's a critical hit matrix. You don't just add extra damage to your attack, there's tables, and Dungeon Crawl Classics has so many tables. Also, you can burn your ability scores to boost your die rolls. Every character can burn luck, but only thieves and halflings regenerate it easily, whereas wizards and elves can also burn strength, agility, or stamina to power their spells and slowly heal back the lost points over time. Spellcasting is what Dungeon Crawl Classics is famous for. Magic will be an entire broadcast on its own, but for now, be aware that when casting a spell, you want to roll as high as possible, because each spell has different mechanical effects and damage based on the number you roll. A roll of 12 while casting Flaming Hands, for example, does a piddly 1d3 damage to one target you see in range, whereas at its highest roll, it creates a 40-foot burst of immolating fire, dealing 4d10 plus your caster level to all creatures in the blast. Wizards don't simply lose spells or spell slots after casting. Losing spells only happens for them when they botch the casting roll, and clerics never lose their spells. Instead, when they botch a roll, their range of failure for spell casting increases. Also, clerics have access to turn unholy rather than turn undead, meaning what your deity finds reprehensible determines what you're able to turn. This may include undead, demons, monsters, aberrations, lycanthropes, or even angels and lawful dragons. The book also says there's no attacks of opportunity, which is also not 100% true. If you're engaged in melee and you withdraw from it, quote, whether to retreat, move to a new position, or attempt some action, his opponents immediately receive a single free attack. Just be aware that the rules for attacks of opportunity in DCC may vary from what you're used to. And that's it. If you're still with me, thanks for listening. Next time, I'll be getting into character creation as we continue our crash course into Dungeon Crawl Classics on Cosmic Sword Radio.